Welcome to Time for Hope, a faith-based mental health program. Join Dr. Freda Crews, licensed professional counselor, and her guests as they discuss real-life issues and offer expert clinical advice and solid biblical application for any and all life situations. Now, here's your host, Dr. Freda Crews.
Thank you for joining us on Time for Hope. Today my guest is Michelle Borquez, editor and creator of the Freedom series, a series for women that focuses on healing after life's difficulties, which include divorce. And the book out of this series that we will be discussing is by Sharon Kay Ball with Paige Henderson, titled Divorce to Wholeness. Yes, Michelle believes, as I do, that there can be life after divorce, but not without a season of pain and grief. But since God never abandons us, we can trust Him to transform us through our pain. To hear more, stay with us. And Michelle, it's great having you here on Time for Hope.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, Dr. Freda.
And I know you must be excited about this series.
I am. It's been a vision for about 8 years, so I'm very passionate about it.
So you're taking it as it were a book at the time, and other authors, of course, will be involved with each subject. How many subjects? How many books?
We actually have 12 books in the series that will come out over the next year, and we'll probably continue to do more, but we have 12 assigned to different authors.
It is amazing that you can come as the editor of the series, and we're talking about a book out of the series, and you have experienced what the author has gone through in the book, Divorce to Wholeness.
Yes. And again, another thing that I'm extremely passionate about helping women get through, because it's a time where they really need some help navigating through the muck of everything that divorce brings.
It does appear that in reading Sharon's story that she thought her world was together. And then it wasn't, and she discovered that, and she did everything she could possibly do to fix things. Right. We women are really good at that, aren't we?
That's true, we do. I think, and in Sharon's case, you know, I love her story because here she was, grew up in a pastor's home. Her dad is amazing. I know him personally, and a wonderful church out in Arizona, and really was immune to anything, you know, as far as what divorce would bring, or even understanding what that would mean for her kids and her life. And you're right, she did everything that she could to keep that together as long as she could, even to the point probably of some just denial. And that's a stage that we go through in divorce, is denial.
Yeah, we get many requests for prayer by persons that are going through separation, and sometimes going through divorce or having experienced divorce. But it is amazing to me, with the prayer requests that come in, how many women will hang in there believing and hoping and praying that wandering husband will eventually come back and that they can make things right.
Yes.
But there comes a time, and it came with Sharon, that we have to face reality. And that's one of the things that she brings out in her book. Actually, it can be referred to as radical, acceptance. When we accept something that is for real, it has happened, and we have been in denial or want to stay in denial about it.
Yeah, I think, Dr. Freda, too, it's almost easier to stay in that denial. But at some point, you're right, you have to come to the place. And I always say that, you know, marriage is not broken. You know, marriage is the most beautiful covenant that God created for us here, to have that covenant with one another. But people are broken, and when people are making choices away from God and away from you, eventually there does have to be boundaries. I've been really careful not to tell someone when that time comes, because only that person really knows, and they have to seek the Lord. And really, I even for myself, in going through my situation, I really pressed in and prayed as much as possible to just seek the Lord and for answers on what that would look like.
Or a miracle to turn things around. And
yes,
sometimes it
absolutely.
happens. Sometimes God sees fit to do that, but we cannot we cannot sit by and believe it unless that's exactly what He is telling us to do, and as it were, giving us a vision or giving us some hope rather than continuing in denial. Sharon's story, and you, I don't think you came from the same background. We shared a little off camera. That her story included that a perfect life. She had it all worked out, didn't she? And she did come, as you said, from a good home, a pastor's home, and but this guy came into her life. She must have fallen madly in love with him. They had children, and but he was unfaithful to her more than once, and she still tried to hang in there for a good period of time.
She was very committed to the marriage and to believing in marriage, and rightfully so. I mean, marriage, you know, just to walk away, we do want to fight for our marriages as much as possible. But again,
and I think we should.
Yeah.
I don't. We're not against fighting for our marriages until. But the reality is, some marriages will not work.
Exactly.
We have to come
appreciate
there.
You saying that.
Sometimes we have to come there. Some marriages will not work. Even Paul took that up. You know. Paul had been married. His did not work, and it must have been so bad he never wanted to get into another one. From reading after him.
Saying that. Absolutely, and you're exactly right, Dr. Freda. There's that choices that people make, and when she married, they were two believers coming together, and when someone else makes choices, you know, you're not in control of that.
That you can't control. We have reason, tradition tells us, and we have reason to believe that Paul was married and that she deserted him, left him when he became a Christian after having the experience on the road to Damascus. So Sharon brings out that we must come to a place, accept reality, realize the marriage is over, that it cannot be fixed. This happens sometimes, and I think sometimes people get out too early. You know, and then sometimes people stay too long.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right.
Yeah. So, but anyway, she said at some point she found out that life was not perfect. That we cannot, as children of God, expect a perfect life. That these things can happen.
Yes, and. You know, it's a part of our trials and suffering that we go through. And I remember speaking once to Anne Graham and saying, you know, I thought if I did all these things right, you know, when I became a Christian, you know, I was homeschooling, I was on the worship team, leading Bible study, and you think if you do all those things right, then your life equals blessings. And I remember her saying to me, that's a false doctrine, you know, because we don't know. There's going to be trials in our life. There's going to be suffering, and we're not in control of somebody else's decisions. So we take that on, and like you said, we accept it, and then it's moving beyond it, because really it creates such a crisis. And I liken it to somebody going through a major car accident and being so, you know, being in the intensive care unit. And sometimes we expect people when they go through even just a loss of a spouse or divorce, you know, just to get back up and be like, okay, you're fine, come on, let's just keep going. You're a Christian, you know, just keep pressing through. But that's like asking somebody who just went through a major car accident and is in intensive care on life support to get up and get out of that bed and just walk out the door. That's not going to happen. So you need that process. And then the Freedom Series is really meant to share a testimony and then some biblical hope for overcoming.
Yes. You know, the church can be very hard on people. And one of the areas that many churches are hard on people is grief. They don't allow their people to grieve. Yes. As a counselor, I've had many people tell me that and have to deal with the people at the church where they attend, expecting them to get over it you know, that
Yes.
all things work together for good. That's one of the first things very often they'll hear. All things work together for good to those who love God.
Yes.
There can be a time a person can be told that, but not immediately after the loss of a daughter or a son or a husband or even a parent, as far as that goes. So we have to allow people to grieve, and divorce is a type of death.
Oh, yes.
And Sharon brought that out. So she says it's a living death of the way life was as we knew it. That was really a tremendous way of explaining what it's like to go through a divorce. There must be a time to grieve.
Oh, and don't you think, Dr. Freda, though, usually the people who have that expectation are people who haven't actually experienced that kind of grief. Because, you know, once you've gone through it, you realize what it takes to walk through that process. And it is a process. And for some, it could be a year or 2 years. For some, it's 3, 4, 5. I've seen women who've gone through a divorce and it's 10 years and they're still grieving.
I've had some in counseling never wanted to be married again. They even would find someone that they might be in love with but didn't want to marry, too afraid yet. Too much fear of what had already happened, that again they would be abandoned or betrayed. But Sharon does have quite a bit to say about the church and how you feel in some churches when you go through a divorce. You want to share it with me?
Well, I think, you know, it's hard even to, I know for me, being the single mom, I was a single mom for 8 years with 4 kids, and it was very difficult just to even go to church by myself, because you're right, life as we knew it is changed. And you've known something from me in my case, and for Sharon, she was, I think, 22 years. I was, you know, had been with my husband at that time for 15. And so to walk into a church alone and have to sit there and you feel like you have a big D on your forehead and, you know, everybody's staring at you when nobody really probably is even paying attention. And in some churches, you know, you may have to change churches because they've known you as a couple, and it's very hard for them to accept something different.
It's hard to have friends because couples don't usually want an extra woman in the crowd. I'm a widow, and there are some of the same things you go through as a widow as you do in divorce. And so I'm not sure that churches, many churches, not all. We're not talking about all churches. Right. We got some great churches out there and people and caring people, but some forget that widows and divorced people need to be ministered to.
Absolutely.
You agree?
Oh, goodness.
Yes.
Yes. There should be a whole ministry just to that.
Look after our own, as it were. Yes.
So that you can walk them through their healing to get to their wholeness.
Absolutely.
So that they can be effective, again, for the kingdom.
Be effective. So we want to go out on a positive note for a break.
That's right. That's right.
And we'll be right back. Too many people believe that the grass is greener on the other side of divorce, or that divorce is the answer to their never-ending conflict. Admittedly, divorce is sometimes inevitable, and under some circumstances, it is better than two people destroying each other in their attempts to save their marriage for the sake of saving a marriage. Whatever the reason, divorce is never without grief. Either one or both partners will grieve the loss of their marriage. If children are involved, they will experience loss and confusion. To grieve one's losses is normal, natural, and healthy. So when divorce happens, the first step towards healing and recovery is to own and honor the feelings of betrayal, anger, confusion, guilt, fears, loneliness, depression, and all other emotions that the breakup of a marriage and or family can produce. Don't kid yourself or your children. For the time being, things are not all right, and the reality is that it is going to be a tough go for a while. If you are the grieving one, go with the flow and give yourself time to grieve. At the same time, begin forming a long-range view and perspective. Endings can usher in new beginnings. Healing and recovery will not come until you face the reality that your marriage has ended. While you grieve, you must also start moving towards the future. Make sure that you are getting sound legal and financial advice. Perhaps a divorce support group can provide the empathy and nurturing you need early on. If you are already in counseling, I suggest continuing until you feel that you have successfully navigated the treacherous rapids of divorce. If you have not sought counseling, now would be a good time. Make sure that your counseling includes biblically based spiritual direction, which will include allowing the compassionate and omnipotent Creator God to get you back on the right path that He has planned for you, in spite of what He has allowed to happen in your life. As you gain strength and gradually let go of the past, you will be able to embrace the future, believing it to be pregnant with hope and meaning. I always appreciate you joining us on Time for Hope. My guest for today is Michelle Borquez, and she is the editor of a series of books, one of which we are discussing by Sharon Kay Ball with Paige Henderson on the subject of divorce to wholeness. That's a lot to say.
Yes, that was impressive.
That's a lot to say. Anyway, Sharon came to a point that she made a decision, an important decision, that she was moving into a new normal. And of course, today she has recovered. And we want to talk about recovery and some of the steps that she had to go through and you've had to go through because you also have experienced divorce. It makes me think of a story I heard or read a long time ago when we think about when we come to that point. This little boy at school, they were doing a project for their mothers, and he was making his mother what we call in the South, what I grew up with, a vase. Now, it could be vase, but we called them vases. And so he made this beautiful vase for his mom, and they came for the program and the presentations and everything, and were leaving, and they were in the hall, and she dropped it. And it broke into many, many pieces. And here the little boy's heart had been in this for a long time. You know what she did? She said, let's get down here and pick up the pieces and see what we can make out of them.
That's good. I love that.
Yeah. And we have to do that so many times in life, don't we?
We do.
We have to pick up the pieces and see what we can make out of them. And Sharon does a good job in her book, and Paige helping her or assisting her of telling how she did that and how others going through divorce can do it.
Yes, and Dr. Freda, that's exactly right. Sharon's story, and her, there's nothing more powerful than a testimony. And that's what gives us hope. You're giving hope to people by just sharing your story of moving and pressing through things. And that's what Sharon did in the book. She actually said, I went through a divorce, and there is hope for you. I don't know where you're at in your divorce. And I just see that so much when I talk to women who've just either gone through a divorce, sometimes even after being a year out of a divorce, just the hopelessness and the loneliness because they've lost all their friends, or they don't feel welcomed at church for some reason, whatever the case may be. And it's really just saying, hang on, as you walk through, and just like you walk through any grief, there are some stages you're going to walk through. You're going to walk through the anger. You're going to have to work through the forgiveness. So it's working through all those things and pressing through. I can sit here with joy today because God has restored. There's the restoration part. And I'm in the harvest. But when I was in the desert, when I was in the place of suffering, I couldn't even get out of bed. It took me a year to be able to get over that.
You can say you're restored and you've recovered. You've also been transformed as a person.
I have.
You're not the same person you were, are you?
No.
And we never are. We are never the same person after we come out of a crisis as we were when we went into it. And we can be a new person. We can be transformed if we allow God to be the potter and we become the clay. And Sharon brings that out again in her book, that God has us on this wheel and He's the potter.
That's right.
And if we, the first time, remember, the clay was defective and didn't make it, and He put it on the wheel again and made a beautiful, probably a vase out of it. He does that with us as persons. When we go on that wheel the second time, then we come out a different person, a new person, a transformed person. And when God allows us to go through the kind of pain that you and Sharon are sharing, that's His purpose. Is for us to be changed.
To be totally, and whether He uses divorce or something else, He uses things in our life to, like you said, it's really coming into that obedience. And you know, if you can choose to stay in unforgiveness, and that keeps you bitter. Or you can choose to move through the forgiveness, which is what God's called us to. And it's not easy. I always tell women, because you know, it takes really saying, I'm choosing to do this. I'm going to be obedient to God's word.
It is a cognitive decision. And when it comes up, we're talking about forgiveness, you turn around and do it again. It's not a one-time act. Some people believe it to be it's not a one-time act. It continues to go on, especially when there are children involved.
Absolutely.
With an ex-spouse.
Yes.
It has to happen over
because there's
and
continuous situations that really never changes.
Yeah.
The domino effect of that divorce continues. And so it's choosing in that moment not to react, because there's many moments in that situation that you would react and say, you know, I'm angry and I don't want to forgive you. And it's in those moments that we're also an example to our kids. And that's really what, more than anything for me, was, you know, and I know for Sharon, she has 3 beautiful children. We make that choice too for our children, so that that they can also see that that you can come out the other side, and that there is restoration, and that God doesn't fail us, even in our places of suffering.
With the forgiveness can be, when it's possible and safe, to cooperate with the ex-spouse or the former spouse for the children's sake. We don't, you know, some make a point of just degrading the the other parent, and you know, we don't want that when it can be otherwise. We don't want it when it can be otherwise. They need both parents.
So well said. Yes, it's so important. And in my situation, I'm able to do that. Sharon's is more difficult. So every situation is different, and that's where you really have to seek that out, those people that can give you that good advice on how to handle that.
She has directions in her book also for recovery and so forth. And then she also tells about her grief and lays that out real well. When we speak of recovery, she says it's a slow process, and here's what we want to go out with in her book. Allow God to be the potter. We talked about that. Rediscover oneself. That is vital. Would you admit,
absolutely.
Agree with me on that?
Absolutely, Dr.
And
Freda.
agree with Sharon on that. Wait before starting another. That was one of the most difficult things when in counseling, was to keep people from immediately jumping into another relationship. That's very dangerous. It can be very dangerous. Usually 2 years is recommended when possible. And then allow the children to grieve. That's very important too.
Very important.
Don't feel like we're being cheated. I'm the single mom and I'm doing all of this, and yet you're grieving over that father. That's not what God would have us do, is it?
No, to embrace them in their time of grief is so important with our kids.
Yes. So would you say you are, like we talk about recovered alcoholics, are you a recovered divorcee?
I am in a place, and this was before I remarried. I have a wonderful husband, and I love him very much. But even before that, God had brought me to a place of wholeness in him. And really seeing that, you know what, he is my provider. He is faithful to me as a single mom, and he was all those years, 8 years.
He
never abandoned me.
Never abandoned you,
No.
did he?
No, and he's been faithful to my children, too.
He's got, yeah. Says he won't, so he has to keep his word, right?
That's right. Amen.
It's great having you.
Thank you,
for
Dr.
coming,
Freda.
and you tell Sharon we like her book.
Okay, I'll let her know.
I encourage our guests to get a copy.
I will.
Either for a friend or if they're going through it for themselves. And then I have something to share with you before we go. I have a letter that says, Dear Dr. Freda, I watch your program frequently and enjoy it and you very much. I consider you to be an excellent preacher and Christian woman of God. Thank you for that. And I am blessed by the knowledge and wisdom that I receive from your teachings. May God continue to be with you. I appreciate you and Time for Hope. And then I have a letter that reads, Dear Dr. Freda, I am going through a divorce. It has taken 5 years to get through it. I left my husband because he was abusive. I tried to keep reconciling because we have a child, but I now feel like getting out was the best thing to do for myself and my daughter. Please pray for us, and be assured we have. Be assured that we take these prayer requests that come in to Time for Hope to a sovereign, powerful, almighty God that is able to intervene in any situation in a loving, gentle, kind way. And we believe in prayer here at Time for Hope. So those of you that haven't shared your prayer request with us, we invite you to do so. And I also look forward to having you join us again next week on Time for Hope.
A free fact sheet that contains additional information about today's topic is available upon request from our ministry. You can also receive a copy of today's resource for $4 plus $3 shipping and handling. To receive our free fact sheet or our guest book or both, you may call us at 800-669-9133. Write us at Post Office Box 2169, Spartanburg, South Carolina 29304. Or visit our website at timeforhope.org. When you call or write, please prayerfully consider a donation to our ministry. Our ministry's mission is to offer hope to discouraged and hurting people. As we continue to give out messages of hope, you can become a member of our team by sending us a financial gift of any amount. When you send your gift to support Time for Hope, you are joining us in offering hope to many viewers who might believe there is no hope for their situation. And you are also enabling us to inform and inspire some viewers to expand our mission as they learn and in turn can minister more effectively to hurting people around them. Until next time, have a great week. And remember, it is time for hope.